Okay, hello everyone, and many thanks for joining the session today. My name is Anastasia Stogny, and I'm very honored to be moderating this extremely interesting panel. I can already tell. I'm a journalist. I'm working for the Financial Times covering Russia. And the topic we are here to discuss is the information war and how not to lose it by being too blinded by short-term victories. So I would suggest, as a form of introduction of the panelists and also as a starting topic, just to briefly define what the short victories are and how do we actually define victories in the information war. So I would suggest to start from my right. Yanis, go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. And from my perspective, information or cognitive war is no different than a real war. So to me, the victory in the disinformation war means victory in a battlefield, and that is my definition of it.
So have you observed any short victories yet?
I think the biggest victory that we had was in this war was at the very beginning, when US campaign basically took out all the T's from Russian propaganda, and as we saw, they didn't know how to address the problem when what they intend to do is well known to all the world but the Russians themselves. And therefore it undermined their strategy, campaign, and in a way also contributed to the victory in the battle for Kiev, and I think that was a detrimental element in this war.
Okay. Let's move on to Kiev, to Anaid.
Before I will answer some questions, I just need to say thank you for having me here. I'm first time in this conference, and this is the honor. So I will give just Ukrainian perspective regarding our short victories. It's, of course, our resilience to these disinformation campaigns of Russia, and I just need to say that we raised awareness about and raised media literacy in our country. We constantly working with it, and we understand that this is not just some disinformation campaign that just can be missed, or somehow we just can ignore it. And by educational means, we created some cartoons for our children. What is disinformation? What is information bubble? What is bots, etc. And additionally, we made a lot of trainings for our students, our state representatives, like state institutions, and I think this is short-term victory, but next level will be like, I think, more strategic work with our government, etc., and regulations. So,
thank you. Carl, what are the short victories in your opinion?
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here. In terms of me and the Global Engagement Center of the U.S. State Department, any day that I can make Zakharova or Solovyov or Peskov or Simonyan mad, that is a short-term victory, especially when they angrily comment and provide a link to our reports and thereby help amplify them. So those are short-term victories. To give one specific example, and this was about 8 months ago now, we had been observing Russian disinformation planning, trying to accuse Ukraine of using a dirty bomb, conventional explosive to spread radioactive material. And we knew they were talking about it, but we didn't know how they were going to use it. And then we observed through intelligence reports on a particular part of the front line, they were issuing chem-bio hazmat suits, personal protective equipment, to troops. Now, if you're about to hit by a surprise dirty bomb attack, you usually don't put your own troops into chem-bio first. So at that point, we made a decision internally. We had a bit of a debate in Washington, but the GEC prevailed, and we went public and we exposed, even though this probably cost some intelligence assets, but we exposed the fact that the Russians were planning to accuse Ukraine of that. They dropped the campaign. I'm not saying that they won't ever use a dirty bomb accusation in the future or an actual dirty bomb, but they dropped that campaign from their strategy, and they did not set off a dirty bomb, which we thought would have been very dangerous. So that was a small victory that we were glad to have.
Still sounds like a great victory to me. Anyway, let's continue with more small victory observations from Richard.
Sure, of course. I mean, all the short-term victories goes towards the long-term goal, and the long-term goal, of course, is Ukraine's victory eventually, and what it means is, of course, not going to be defined on Ukrainian terms, but eventually, and hopefully, Russia fully out, military and defeated, and Ukrainian winning. And a lot the same way as Mr. Sars just told, in information battlefield, you see those victories in the same way as in the real battlefield, in the military and kinetic domain. Having said that, I think there are plenty of victories we can mention over the last 20 months, both at the Ukrainian level, but also European and Euro-Atlantic level, and also global level, starting from, everyone will remember in the first evenings of the war, President Zelensky and his closest inner circle having that video with Me Too. Everyone will remember Snake Island and the famous, everyone learned a bit of a Russian language by then, I guess. And everyone also might remember how Ukrainian granny killed a drone by throwing a tomato jar. And all of those are very nice stories to win on a Ukrainian level. On a European level, I think the biggest story, success story over the past 20 months is that we have kept our unity all together. Russia was thinking and that we will be all fighting each other about what to do, and we were all united. We still have kept that, united position, both states, governments, but also our societies, still showing big support towards Ukraine and really showing the spirit that we'll be fighting for Ukraine until the very end. And the third is global level. Of course, I think the victory at United Nations also, and quite early hours of the war, of getting this over 140 nations going behind Ukraine and against Russia. So Ukraine has been having those all good victories and stories to tell. And now some people are doubting whether there is some kind of fatigue, whether this counterattack is going as fast as one might expect. But hello, guys, can I have a rhetoric question? What do you expect actually really from Ukraine? Do you expect to blow up Crimea Bridge every day?
That's a rhetoric question. So, Jurgis, I think you're the last, and I would like you to first also give your definition of small victories and probably some examples of small victories, but also to talk a little bit about the contradiction, if there is any, between small victories and a long-term perspective, and how ready, in your opinion, the West is to fight in long-term battle, informational battle.
Thank you, Anastasia, for these two questions. I mean, in terms of short-term victories, I would look at the policy side, and I think this very important victory that we achieved is that actually we stopped admiring this problem of foreign information manipulation, that we actually are doing now something about it, starting to impose the costs on these guys who are attacking us. And I think one of the victories that we had, for example, at European Union level, we adopted a specific toolbox. So the Council of the European Union adopted a toolbox to tackle foreign information manipulation. We have a Digital Services Act that will actually allow us to fight, Russia and other state actors on the social media platforms, let's put it so. On the action side, I think one short victory for me is actually sanctions. We actually successfully applied, we banned the broadcast of some of these so-called media outlets, the Sputnik, the RT, formerly known as Russia Today, and many others. I think that was a very good action. If I go to the second question, in terms of long-term game, it's difficult. I mean, if I would try to find kind of an analog, maybe I would paraphrase the song of Guns N' Roses, it's adapt or die. I think, short-term victories should not keep us happy at all, because the Russian Federation and other actors are actually clearly building up the structures for the long-term game, and we have to adjust, and if I would try to put the readiness into kind of, 2-3 blocks. I mean, one probably block that is very important, that we have actually political leadership or political attention to the issue. that we also have actually, the energy to mobilize. Because autocracies mobilize very well. I mean, we saw it, how they do it. And of course, behind mobilization, you need to put resources. Because otherwise, if we don't have resources, there's only people, who fight disinformation, but we need institutions, we need budgets, we need tools to monitor disinformation. And I think on all these three angles, we are scoring positive points, but there's much more to go.
Thank you. Thanks for a great contribution. And I should say that I agree with you that short-term victories shouldn't blind us, but they should encourage us. That's why I think it's really important we talk about them and praise them. And the next question I would address first to Anand, who literally fights on the front line of the information war in Ukraine. And if you could share with us your observations. So how has Russian disinformation strategy and toolkit has evolved since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, if it evolved anyhow?
Well, I just may say that we've done pretty revolutionary things. How we blocked Одноклассники, ВКонтакте, we blocked pro-Russian television, and the president created us, like Center for Countering Disinformation under the National Security and Defense Council, because he forecasted that it will be intensive. And indeed, since 21st of February 2022, the massive attacks, intensive attacks that we've got in information space, I can compare with nothing. And I just can say that now they focus not on our country, they focus just on Western countries. And in our country, of course, they're still working, they're using our vulnerabilities to somehow destabilize, discredit somehow our government or destabilize just society. So it's, they changed their focus. But what we are doing with it, and we also changed our approach. We were just like, analytical center who accumulates all monitorings from different state institutions, organizations who will just giving the whole picture of what is happening. But I think every state organizations understood after 21st of February that we should focus on public communication to create every social media accounts that we can. Our intelligence service became like the most, I think, popular Telegram channel they have, etc. And I understand that this is the future. We should every time communicate with our people what is actually happening, where is it true or not, became like state governmental fact checkers. And what we do beside that, of course, it's like fact checking is not enough. We're doing this work with Secret Service of Ukraine when we see, monitor some guys who allegedly propagandists, etc. We're like sending this information to Secret Service of Ukraine, and by this means they can put these people onto sanctions list or open criminal investigations, because of war we have criminal we have articles in criminal code against collaborationism, and that's why we use every opportunity to limit these actors who constantly destabilize our country. And of course, we are trying to work with our fact checkers, our NGOs in our country. When we see some information, we send them our monitorings, and they can mark by means of Meta or etc. that this is disinformation on our Facebook, Twitter, etc. And we blocked more than 200 YouTube channels in our country, in our territory, which consists just in disinformation. And we making like big researches about different big disinformation campaigns, and we share it to our public, for public communication, and to our partners For example, about clandestine transplantology, which this disinformation campaign began just from 2014, or black market weapons. Even now, Russians using opportunity to discredit us, and that we are allegedly like sell all weapons that our partners gave us to Hamas, and they are using it against Israel. Like total nonsense, but still continuing. And the favorite thing that they're doing is creating these disinformation campaigns abroad just to decrease Western partners' support to us. And like, for example, this black hole of Zelensky, that he absorbs Western money. And there were a lot of bunch of videos, fake materials, fake graffitis, which we were constantly communicate with our partners that please pay attention that this is disinformation campaign. Or our First Lady, every time she's visiting some country, they're creating this, disinformation campaigns that she bought something very expensive by the money of our Western partners. Like last time was in New York, she bought allegedly like one jewelry in Cartier for $1 million, like
That's
nonsense,
expensive.
but it became from, this campaign started from Nigerian resources. Yes, and they used it, they put this paycheck and former worker, staff member of the Cartier store started talking about First Lady. She made video, and Nigerian resources supported it. And on the paycheck, there's a date. Like, First Lady was not in New York, she was in Canada. So every time they want to be creative, want to, and unfortunately, somehow it works, because people, when they see it on their smartphones, they don't want to check is it true or not. So that's why we need to put our alliance, we need to work with our partners just to inform about them, and they could use their means to stop it. But we have issues in our country, like the most popular source that we got it is Telegram, and get information from that. If we will come just to Ukraine and say, we're blocking Telegram channels, it would be like total disaster, because when we were blocking ВКонтакте and Одноклассники, we have alternative. We had Facebook, for example, but Telegram channels. Hopefully, WhatsApp launched WhatsApp channels. Maybe we could switch on this page, but still, yes, there's the issues we have to solve, and I think the key things that we learned is not to be relaxed at all, just to work 24 hours per day. And second thing is we understood that public communication and strategic communication is the essence, it is essential, and we need to cooperate and coordinate between our government institutions. Additionally, I think regulations. Digital Service Act is really cool thing, but unfortunately we cannot be a participant. Hopefully we will be in EU and we can use it, but still in our country we don't have such regulations. That's why we are working now about it.
Thank you so much for such a broad description of what is happening. And I think it's really interesting that you mentioned a couple of lessons you learned, because I wanted to ask everyone else, or at least whoever wants to step up and say what have they learned, as in from the perspective of their bodies, the official bodies, or their countries. What lessons have they learned from the Ukrainian experience of successfully tackling Russian propaganda, which is constantly evolving, which, as we said, is now targeting not just Ukraine, but the West within Ukrainian narrative. So can please someone just share their opinion or key takeaways about what they learned and what is useful for their countries or their societies from the Ukrainian experiences?
Well, I think one of the things first and foremost is the fact that the only really effective way to deal with the disinformation is pre-bunking. Debunking is important, but not very effective. Pre-bunking is the only known effective means vis-a-vis disinformation. And that is, I think, the first lesson. Second lesson is that just like in a military battlefield, what really wins the battles is mission command, or delegating the authority and possibility to decide what to do really low down the command chain. The similar logic applies to the communication. If you want to have highly hierarchical communications, they will not work. You have to give the trust into the lower levels of the ones that operate, and give them freedom, and they'll come up with much better answers than any of the hierarchical systems. And the third, don't do bureaucratic talks. Innovative, humorous, out-of-box messages are the ones that work. And if we do something that is very static, very dull, we shouldn't be surprised it doesn't work.
That's great. Any other additions to this counter-propaganda toolbox, please?
Yeah, if I could a little bit add to Yanis. I think also what matters is having a narrative, and having also a network actually to deliver the message. The same as attackers when they have the networks, when they have the proxies, when they try to flood information space. I think we also have to have the same network. And I think Ukrainians kind of proved, that, with the media, both national and regional and civil society organizations and many people sort of rallying behind, you can actually be effective, delivering the message. I think other thing, at least for me personally, what we've learned is actually being quick and dirty works. And sometimes, in communication, you have to be very, very quick, in responding to these lies. I understand, that, yeah, it's nice to have capacities, to pre-bunk, but it's also, important kind of to have this capacity to sort of push back in your face, in a brutal way. And the last thing that I would say, I think in terms of Ukrainian experience, I think we should really applaud Ukraine, because you really managed to destroy the myth of supremacy, of Russian military forces. You managed kind of to destroy the myth of this, brother nations sort of coming together and all of that. So some things really changed, and I hope, this will stay important as well.
Thank you. You got really excited when you were talking about quirky approaches. Do you have any particular examples in mind?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
So you were talking about that we need to be quirky, that we need to be creative in terms of debunking propaganda narratives. So any particular examples which made you so excited about it?
I would invite you all, and that's a little bit a disclaimer, a small promotion piece, to log into our euvs-disinfo.eu website. Every day, we upload new disinformation cases on the website. Every day they provide analysis and basically debunk some of these narratives out there.
Okay, Carl?
I would endorse EU versus Disinfo. We have a State Department site, state.gov, disarming disinformation. That's not the place to find creative and innovative. That's the place to find reports that have taken 2 months to clear and are full of words and not creative. But an example of creative that I really liked, when Finland was joining NATO, they had, whenever you have to prove that you're not a computer or a robot to log into certain websites, they have those pictures where you're supposed to mark the buses or stoplights, and they had a picture of a snow-covered pine forest, and they said, please mark the 15 hidden Finnish snipers. And there were 15 boxes, so that was a very good creative one to push back a little bit on Russian narrative. The main point I just wanted to make is we're seeing the kinetic battlefield in Ukraine. We're seeing the real front line between now and the future on the ground there, but we're seeing in our smartphones, in our phones that we carry in our pockets, the battlefield everywhere in the world. and Russia and others are very effectively waging that war through everyone's phone because we don't realize we're at war yet. And the real thing that we have to do is help make people realize how aggressively Russia is pursuing this. It's rather cheap to put out a lie, but it's not cheap to manipulate the information and interfere to make sure their message gets to your phone before anyone else's. And they're very good at it, and we estimate they spend about $6 billion a year, US, at this effort in Russia, which is up from $2 billion before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So they know it's working, and they're spending a lot of money trying to get into everybody's phone and make sure that the first message you see on whatever social media site you use is one that they've controlled. And this is a war we all have to fight together, or we will all fall to the divisions that they're trying to create.
Thank you, Carl. And we do understand the threat of Russia's disinformation and the huge budget it has for it. But at the same time, we know that there are other actors in the world, and specifically which are targeting the West, which are spreading disinformation. So the question is, how should we balance between Russia and the other actors? Do we have time to postpone the other actors and just focus on Russia? How should West react in this complicated environment of disinformation threats coming from different sources? I think Richard maybe, Richard, go ahead and then Janice jump in.
Sorry, me, okay.
Yo.
I also want to pick up where you left and praise the good work of you of Disinfo. I could not to do it as my former employee and being sent as a seconded expert from Latvian government to our team previously. It was a real pleasure working with you, and I know you're still really rocking it. So yes, about the other actors, of course, the threat landscape is getting wider every day, not just governments, but also private sector getting in their hands in this. So there will be a lot of work in the future, not just coming from Russia, but also other, as we call them in European Union language jargon, FIMI actors, right? But yes, from our perspective here, being borderlines, frontline states of European Union, NATO, of course, for us, the immediate threat in the information environment has always been Russia, likely to remain so for foreseeable future. For obvious reasons. I mean, we've been experiencing this ever since the 90s, or the last 3 decades, ever since Latvia said quite clearly that we're going to be part of the European Union and NATO, not some part of Russian colonial structures that they wanted to set up for us. So we have some know-how on the tactiques and methods that Russia has been using. We have some practice in there on fighting with that. But yes, we will have to do a lot of not just debunking, but also a lot of pre-bunking, and a more commercial from my side. One commercial from my side is, of course, we'll be also next week launching a campaign for Latvian audiences on which really actually combine both debunking and a bit of a pre-bunking. So watch this space.
If I may add, the number of malign actors doing disinformation is growing as we speak. The reason is obviously because it works, it delivers. And also on top of that, it's a good business. So there are all the prerequisites that we have more and more of those. Russia is still the preeminent. China is following up in some regions. They are the biggest actor. Iran and more and more. And then there are some bigger non-government actors that are working in that area. But there are one key feature that unites them all. They all require infrastructure, mostly digital infrastructure, on which they base their operation. And that is where I do believe, instead of looking so much of individual threat actor, but looking at the underlying enablers is one of the key ways to address the problem. And of course, here we come back to the issue of what is the role and responsibility of social media platforms. And a very, very good example recently is the formerly known platform as Twitter, where until the change of ownership, they have really curtailed the reach of the Russian propaganda. But within 2 months of the change of this ownership, in our data sets, we saw that Russian propaganda reach more than doubled. So you see, they are really one of the key enablers. And that is, I hope Digital Services Act delivers, but, well, remains to be seen. But that is the focal area of focus in my view, because one effort undermines all of those threat actors.
Is it just Russian propaganda which boomed on formerly known Twitter?
Well, that was, we have a consistent data base which we will cross-compare, and it's pure data, not my observation. But if I would apply also my observation, I'd say no. And especially now with a war emerging in Israel, we see actually the situation is far worse than we saw in the very early stages in the war in Ukraine. And certainly one of the reasons is that X has become so much more permissive platform for these kinds of activities.
Thank you. Actually, speaking of more war conflicts happening right now, because we've been focusing for obvious reasons on the conflict which is happening right here in Europe, but unfortunately, it's not the only thing. And at the same time, unfortunately, the West is not the only target of Russia's disinformation. So I would suggest we talk a little bit more about Russian propaganda global outreach. So what are the other regions Russia is targeting, and what are the goals Russia is pursuing in so-called global south, as Russian president likes to put it, and other regions probably affected by Russian propaganda. Let's just try to paint a bigger picture. Carl, please go.
Okay, since I work for the Global Engagement Center, I have to
Makes
volunteer
sense,
for
yeah.
the global question. I mean, we've seen these threats from many, many countries, and as just noted with the current conflict in Israel and Gaza, we've seen a surge of new actors as well as the same old actors trying every angle they can. And that's, I mean, China takes a longer-term game and tries to both censor messages it doesn't like and control the messages it does on global social media platforms. Other actors like Iran have places where they're very active and have good reach and places where they're not. Russia has a global reach. I like to say that Russia sort of empties their garbage can every day of disinformation on the world and sees what sticks, and they don't care if some of it doesn't, because they're pouring out so much constantly that some will stick and achieve their goals. And their goals are very rarely to advance Russian political priorities. Every country has the right to use every means to promote its own goals. But Russia manipulates information not necessarily to achieve its own goals, but actually just to create chaos and division in other countries. And almost every country we've seen examples of information manipulation by Russia to undermine faith in government institutions, to question the credibility of free elections, to cause people to question the media, the judiciary in those countries, because Russia believes that creating chaos, especially in democratic countries aligned with NATO, the West, etc., is to their advantage. And whether it is in my own country or in other countries, we find many examples. The one I'd like to cite from 2017, I was teaching at George Washington University, and I don't know if anyone heard here of a controversy. We had an American football player, Colin Kaepernick, who kneeled during the national anthem of our football games and to promote more respect for African Americans. And then other players joined him, and that was a brief controversy in America. We studied 250,000 social media posts in America at that time, some graduate students and me. About 65% of them did not come from the United States. There are very few fans of the NFL, maybe Frankfurt, London, but very few fans of NFL outside of the United States, so that was very unusual. Most of the posts came from St. Petersburg, Russia, and what they were doing was they were entering into a legitimate debate in America, but they were sending messages to African Americans and people on the left saying, these are people just doing peaceful protest, how can you punish them? You need to rise up and fight for your rights. And at the same time, they were sending messages to people on the far right and saying they're trampling on the flag they're spitting on veterans' graves. You need to rise up and fight against this. They were trying to provoke social clashes, and you can see that example in almost every country every day. Russians using information manipulation to tear apart those countries themselves, taking existing issues and amplifying them. So that's why it's such a danger, and that's why we all have to work together to address this. Pre-bunking, debunking, just building awareness, making more people realize that things they receive on their phone are being manipulated. We have yet to do our research in any country where we have not found Russian information manipulation going on. So it's just a danger to us all that we have to be more aware of.
And if I may, there's an interesting new feature coming out from these regions, and that is research by Code of Africa, where they showed and demonstrated that AI-created personality hired 16 journalists to run a news site in Africa and also manage that news site. Also, when we looked at war in Ukraine, we also saw that AI journalists were pumping out a lot of articles in the name of Russian narratives. So there are even sometimes the very new features and new trends they test out in Global South and then reapply in our areas. So I would put out a warning sign for AI journalists we might see in the near future.
This is scary even for real journalists that will be replaced one day. So do you think the West is ready for threats like this and challenges like this, the artificial intelligence specifically?
Well, the threat landscape changes. The technology enables new ways of attacking as well as new ways of defense and resilience. I think I'm reasonably optimistic because we have to be optimistic. The times will be hard, that's for sure. The levels of disinformation will be higher than right now, and there'll be huge challenges. For instance, one, can we tell difference between real material in a digital world or not? Increasingly not so. Yet, I would submit, democracies have bigger resilience than it appears, and autocracies typically appear more resilient than they actually are. And I would put my kind of future claim on that distinguishment between the two.
Well, I just want to add that totally agree that it will raise and be sophisticated, and we saw how coordinated authentic behavior became coordinated inauthentic behavior, and we see the processes that we cannot stop, but we should work on it and strategically understand how we could regulate it. And hopefully unfortunately, we have our unique experience and we are open to share it, and hopefully together we can find the solutions how to win these battles.
Thank you. And before we move to the questions, I would suggest the panelists to answer the last question. We have not really discussed any particular narratives of disinformation, but there is one I think is particularly important, is the so-called news fatigue. So according to Russian propaganda, at least, people in the West are tired of the story of the Ukrainian war or about the conflict, these conflicts in general. So do you think this news fatigue actually exists, or is it an artificially created narrative? And if it exists, how can we deal with it? How do we tackle it? Anyone?
If I may, well, the recent research showed that in the West, as much as 40% actually of the population actually avoid actively news. So that is a trend, and I think we look around, we see that is increasingly realistic. But in a way, that is a phenomenon in its own right. When there's so much and so much negativity, that is a normal. I think what we have to do is go back to what is really working at the emotions of people, and actually go back to the like narratives that evoke the better part of us, supporting these people that, or societies that are in need, that are under the duress, which are being punished, etc. So I think we have to look for emotional stories to revoke that empathy of our societies.
So the answer to fatigue is empathy.
Yes.
Any other opinions on that? Richard?
I think there is some evidence that we could provide. It's not just Minister Lavrov peddling this narrative lately, but there's also actually some, I mean, eventually there is fatigue from news, not fatigue from support to Ukraine. I think if you want to be very precise. So even though some people don't want to maybe listen to radio broadcasts or television on a daily basis, even though the journalists are doing their job, even in Latvia, bringing all the latest angles from the front lines. Some people are tired from the news. It doesn't mean that people stop supporting Ukraine, stop donating funds, stop sending cars, military equipment, and all that. And I think this is actually what matters. And we shouldn't mistake one for the other, even though there is maybe a relative, I'd say not a fatigue, it's not a downward going trend, rather maybe a plateau that might be going up in the near future, then yes, actually giving support to Ukraine, continuously doing this is what matters. And if we look at those numbers, then I think very good.
So they give us some hope that people are fatigued of news, but not of support, not of empathy. Okay.
Yes, and I mean, and it matters only if we can mobilize the public opinion, we as the communicators, we as working for the governments, when it actually matters. If we see some red buttons kind of turning on that support is slipping, then we shall mobilize, of course, the societies, and we will do that by using emotions, using other means, but currently I think very good. I think what matters is that this long-term perspective for the long game, that we should all realize that support for Ukraine is needed in long term. We might need to run a few ultramarathons in a row before we are reaching the finishing line. So we will need a lot of stamina and patience. Second is that Russia will remain a significant actor in this domain. All the sanctions and isolation has not crippled its machinery in the disinformation front line, as our colleague from US just explained. Actually, it's quite the opposite. They have increased their resources. So even if they are defeated, and they will be on the battlefield, they will maintain those hybrid strategies to be used against the Western allies potentially in the future. So we have to have that thinking into mind. And the third is we have to build up our capabilities. This is really the wake-up call. This is the last call for those countries and governments who still haven't yet established structures within their government doing this business, designing doctrines, strategies on how to do it, designing capabilities to monitor, to counter malign influence in the information domain, and practical means and toolkits for wider society to get involved, and for private sector and academia to get involved. We in Latvia, we have a lot of know-how on this. We have developed a doctrine, we have developed the toolkits, so that actually every citizen knows how to recognize pro-Kremlin, not just Kremlin, actually any actors, manipulative methods, how to counter them, and this is something we can also, I think it can be replicated elsewhere in the world.
Thank you. Jurgis, you wanted to say something, or can we move to the question?
Well, I think what I could add is basically the first rule in communication, you know, it's repeat, repeat, and repeat. You know, and when you look at the ecosystems, you know, that Russia have these days, or Chinese are building very fast and building in a very kind of elaborate ways, looking long term, I think, you know, they will be there to sort of to bring their meta-narratives. And I think all these narratives, you know, that we see and hear, you know, every day, they more or less are the same. It's nothing changed from, I don't know, early 2000s, you know. You know, it's always about, you know, the West being corrupt, you know, the Western values falling apart. It's about our friends from Washington controlling everybody, you know, sort of in the European Union and other things. It's just being illustrated by all kinds of different stories, you know, for different audiences globally, you know, whether it's an Arab-speaking country, you know, or whether it's in the Western Balkans, somebody, or whether somewhere else. And I think the trick will be really, you know, to kind of to understand that a little bit like in a defense spending, you know, we have to do a massive catch-up, you know, in protecting our information environments. You know, we have to work on the one hand on international norms. We have to work on the other hand, you know, that we have better situational awareness, what's happening, you know, how they are manipulating us. And we have to work, I think, which is the key thing, it's actionable responses. We actually have to take actions, not only to talk in these forums, admiring the problem, but come back and see how we can kill the chain of these manipulations, you know, because it's not only about narratives, it's also about behaviors. And if you understand what are behaviors, you know, what repetitive behaviors are out there, you know, how they are impersonating, you know, trusted media, you know, or how they're publishing the fakes, how they're using influencers you know, to pass the message. I mean, these behaviors can be stopped, you know, there's nothing kind of magic in it, but we have to build our capacity to do that.
Thank you, Jurgis. And now I know that the audience has questions, so I suggest we move to them. So, sir.
Thank you.
Could you also please introduce yourself?
To my mind,
first?
Klaus Wittmann, Potsdam University. To my mind, strategic communication is much more than information and disinformation. And I think our strategic communication should be as proactive as possible, not just reacting to Russian disinformation. And some of our messages should be simple and snappy. One very nice piece of strategic communication was Zelensky's public advice to the Russians to think about getting away from Crimea as long as the Kerch Bridge is still there. And one leitmotif should be what I myself have used several times on TV with a good response. Zelensky has become the face of freedom, while Putin personifies the folly of tyrants.
And your question being, or was it just
What
a comment?
do you think about that?
hard to argue. And the lady next to you.
Irina Kuznetsova, board member of the Latin Transatlantic Organization. I'll keep it short. Is it still worth trying to reach out to the population of Russia? Or if yes, maybe you have some creative ideas how and what should be done. Thank you.
That's a great question, and we actually discussed it before we went out here, and we thought we'll keep it, you know, the discussion around Russia, just because it's a whole different topic. But I would suggest just super quick, a couple of comments. Any ideas? Like, let's keep it precise, but it's an amazing question. It's a really interesting question. Who would like to?
Okay, I'll start. First, on strategic communications, obviously, it's not just the communications. The actions are the loudest communicators, and that is obvious and clear, and that is something that we miss all the time and has to be repeated. Second, on Russia, I don't think there is a short-term answer or a miracle silver bullet that will give you an answer. I do think we have the problem with the Russian population's radicalization for a very formidable time period.
May I add you know, when our intelligence published wiretaps of soldiers that were in our territory, and they were constantly repeating Russian narratives that was like from Solovyov, from Skryabeva, etc. Well, it's really, honestly, I don't see like in 10 years, in 15 years, they will change their mind totally, but hopefully with our analytical things that we see what they what the narrative they use, what tactics they use, even this information alibi, like fake pre-bunking, yes, that when they are saying that the Ukrainians are going to kill their prisoners of war in Elenivka, and then bombs, and they just started like killing our prisoners of war in Elenivka. So they are creative. They created such techniques that we cannot even imagine. And that's why, you know, we should handle disinformation campaigns of Russia, but with the Russian society, it's just another, I don't know, part of work, long-term work.
I would just add, yes, Stratcom is very important, and I'm going to borrow your example, if I may, for future talks. And in terms of reaching out to Russians, I can't, in a public forum, go into too much detail, but we certainly are trying everything we can to reach audiences in Russia and elsewhere. The problem is countries that use information manipulation and disinformation deny to their own citizens, whether you're talking about Russia, Iran, North Korea, China, they deny to their own citizens the opportunity to get alternate points of view, to see more than one perspective in their own information media. And they work very hard to try to create iron curtains around their own countries to block, or great walls around their own countries to block free flow of information and ideas. That doesn't mean it's impossible, but it's interesting how they exploit the freedom of other countries to allow alternate voices and protest when there's efforts to try to regulate that, while at the same time in their own countries they try to make sure that people only hear one point of view. So it's a challenge, but it is important.
Thank you, and thanks for the question. I think we have another question from Mr. Rivera.
Andris Gobinč, European Movement Latvia and Economic and Social Committee. I wanted to ask about wording. Even in this conference, we talk about Ukraine war. Is that the right thing to do? Most probably no. How to stop this? And we have the same is, well, not in this conference, but elsewhere, former republics of Soviet republics, which is still used in a lot of even international news channels. And the third, which I would like to mention as a wrong wording, is helping Ukraine. It's helping ourselves, what we do when providing military equipment to Ukraine. So how to stop these wrong wordings? There must be some strategies how to do it.
Anyone? Why this wording is wrong and how to deal with wording and why is it important for disinformation?
I mean, if I might take the first bite, just what Georgi just said, repetition, repetition, repetition. Russia's war on Ukraine, Russia's full-scale war on Ukraine. We can find a few other synonymous, but it's never Ukraine crisis, Ukraine war. We have seen all those kind of errors, I'd say, as I've evaluated them, even from very credible Western media. I think repeat, repeat, and repeat. This is a continuous ongoing conflict on the information domain where we have to pressure back.
Thank you. I think the lady over there also has a question.
Thank you. Vlada Dumenko. I represent here International Center for Ukrainian Victory, Ukrainian civil society. So I'm very grateful for sharing of your experience in countering Russian propaganda. And I also work in communications area. So, and in my opinion, we have to, kind of measure our short-term results, our short-term victories. And for me as Ukrainian, our short-term results could be, for example, official invitation to NATO. For example, confiscations of Russian assets, frozen Russian state assets, yes. Or, for example, providing sanctions against Rosatom. So my question is, what's short-term victories or results before our common victory do you expect? Thank you.
So you mean not just in the information front, but in general? Let's talk about
Well, for me, actually, there's only one right now consequential element, and that is more arms and all types of arms to Ukraine. That, to me, is the short term that leads to an ultimate victory.
Anait? Let's just answer.
For me, it's being in NATO, but it is not short term, unfortunately.
And the short term?
Weapons, 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 weapons.
Kyle?
You know, I'm an optimist, despite all those scary anecdotes. My short-term victory is more international members of a coalition designed to share information and fight back against information manipulation. And we're seeing more and more countries join in. The US-EU summit yesterday in Washington produced a statement of all the EU leaders, including countries that haven't been active in this area before, with the United States supporting a combined international effort. You know, NATO, Article 5, some of the strongest things to promote peace and stability in Europe ever. I think we can do the same thing with a coalition of like-minded countries that push back and make it harder for the information manipulators to succeed. That's, I think, a reasonable short-term victory that we can get in the next 6 months, and then invite other countries to join globally, so we have a minority of countries that are not aware of or not fighting this problem, and a majority that are fighting. That's my goal.
Thank you.
I mean, for me, I think the recommendations would be first not to overvaluate the comms. So weapons, yes, I joined the choir, but also at the same time comms matter, and I think keeping unity across the Euro-Atlantic, but also beyond Euro-Atlantic as a short to medium term necessity, not just a victory.
But
we need it.
Without the comms, you don't get the weapons.
So you guess?
Yeah, if maybe add a little bit of kind of the different kind of regional perspective. I think what we have, you know, especially in Russia case that we also partially touched yesterday in this discussion on the new old imperialism, is that Russia essentially for the last 100 years sort of view or apply, let's say, the view on the world that, you know, the weaker the neighbors are, the stronger Russia is. You know, and that's why, you know, that's why they are so much assertive and so much meddling in everybody's affairs. And, you know, sort of going from that angle, I think what we could do together with our American friends is that we both are the great export powers, if you like, and we should really help the region, and Ukraine included, you know, sort of adopt, you know, some of the tools that we have, share with them, you know, our experiences, you know, support as much as we can independent media in that region, because they will be key actually long term, you know, winning the war of attrition in the future. So I think the more we can deliver today, especially also on the let's say on the weaponry to resist information manipulation, the better we will be. And that's why we're talking about information Rammstein, you know, already for some time.
Thank you. And I know there are more questions, and I know this discussion is extremely interesting and important, but unfortunately we are running out of time. So I would suggest we just, you approach the panel members in private, in person, and ask the questions. I'm sure everybody will be happy to contribute. But I just wanted to thank once again the panel members and the audience for participating in this debate. I think it was really valuable. And for me personally, as a journalist and as a person, it is valuable not only because we outline the future threats of disinformation and Russian disinformation specifically, but also that we discussed certain particular practical tools, and also that we managed to find hope. This is not too bad, even in dark times. So thank you, everyone.